Good afternoon, everyone. Illinois Extension is happy to host another BEAD mapping webinar for you today. I'm Nancy Wodrago, State Specialist in Community and Economic Development. We're happy to welcome Devon Braunstein and Shubhika Agarwal, who will once again get us oriented through the BEAD challenging process, discuss how to submit challenges, and much more. And we're just happy that you're back on the platform. We're grateful for your time. And we will look forward to the Q&A where you'll field those questions. And thank you so much for continuing this outreach. Devon?
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I think this is going to be a hot topic today. The first official demo of our soft launch BEAD challenge map. I think that this will give everyone a much more tangible idea of what the challenge process is all about and kind of how to go about figuring out what you might want to challenge, looking at the status of locations of interest and lots of other things like that. So welcome, and for those of you I have not met, I'm Devon Braunstein, Assistant Director of the Illinois Office of Broadband, joined with my colleague Shubhika Agarwal to do a demo later in the session. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my slides all right. Quick agenda for today. We will go over some recap slides on the BEAD program and the challenge process. Again, thank you for your patience if you have heard some of these slides a handful of times, but we're getting more and more new registrations, so do want to make sure that folks are up to speed as we get started. Then we'll go through an actual demo of the BEAD challenge map, share a couple of examples, and then take your questions. Objectives. After this webinar, we hope that you will know what the BEAD challenge is, why it's important, and how you can participate. We hope that you will be familiar with current and upcoming resources. And finally, understand how to use the BEAD challenge map and how it fits into the overall challenge process. So first, we will go through some recap slides. BEAD, we've been talking about it for a while now. So just to recap, Illinois was awarded $1.04 billion to connect all unserved and underserved locations to broadband over the next 5 years. Our first step is going through this BEAD mapping challenge process to lock in the map that will inform where the funding goes in terms of broadband infrastructure deployments. Then we'll spend the next 365 days going through the process to select our subgrantees, so providers who will cover all of those regions that are eligible for funding. And then finally, we'll make those selections and deploy the projects over the next 4 years. Every project needs to have a low-cost service option and a middle-class affordability plan. And then wherever possible, we'll go beyond the unserved and underserved locations to be able to connect community anchor institutions and making sure that all of those multi-dwelling units have connection in every unit. So this is kind of the high-level BEAD process overview, and where we are now is in this second bucket right here, Initial Proposal Volume 1. So this is a document that was required by NTIA, National Telecommunications and Information Administration. So Illinois submitted its Volume 1. The Volume 1 document describes what the challenge process is and the processes that we will undertake. So we'll make sure that you get this link if you're curious to just read a little bit more about what's behind all of this. We are in final review, so we are waiting for that final green light from NTIA, which is necessary in order for us to launch the challenge process. This slide is a double click into the challenge process. So what are the different phases? Exciting to see this slide change from last week to this week. So we still are accepting pre-registrations. If you think that you will want credentials to log into the challenge portal and actually submit a challenge yourself, we need you to pre-register. I know many of you are probably already pre-registered. If this does not sound familiar, look out for a link so you can submit your information and we'll get you credentials to log into the portal once that is available. Note that no credentials have been sent yet. This will be available much closer to when the portal launches. So you should have received a confirmation email that we've received your info, and then the next step is that validation and credentialing. The second step is locations eligible for challenge published. So we have published our initial map. Once we're in the 7-day window of the challenge portal going live, that map will be kind of locked in. For now, we're continuing to make some final refinements, but it should give you a good picture of where things will land going into the challenge process. I've received lots of questions about publishing CSVs behind the map, and the answer is yes. We'll be publishing a list of unserved and underserved location IDs. So for those who have access to the fabric, you'll be able to do some matching and analysis there. We'll also be publishing our final list of community anchor institutions, how they're categorized, and then their eligibility status based on broadband availability. So we'll talk about that more today. Then the challenge process will open. We're looking at early February now. Again, this is totally out of our control at this point. We are feeling good about our review with NTIA. So once we have their green light, we'll kind of pick that launch date, and then the challenge process will be open for 2 to 3 weeks. And during that time, you can submit challenges. But in the meantime, you can kind of prepare to submit your challenges by looking at the map and looking at those CSVs, which we'll make available very soon. Once the challenge window closes, we'll enter the rebuttal phase. So the state broadband office will kind of take in all of those challenges submitted, review the evidence, make sure everything is valid, and then pass along those challenges to internet service providers who are listed as providing service at the locations in question. And then providers will have the opportunity to provide their own evidence to rebut the challenge. And then we'll go through a final adjudication process where we'll make final determinations and publish a final map. Then that map will be locked in and will influence BEAD allocations and need over the next 5 years. Another recap slide, but I think it is super helpful. So what is the purpose of the challenge process? The purpose of the challenge process is to make sure that our state's broadband map accurately reflects your home or your organization's access to broadband. This is important because it informs which locations will be eligible for funding. Who can submit challenges? Units of local government, nonprofit organizations, and internet service providers can directly get credentials to log into the challenge portal, which is not yet live, and submit their challenges directly. Note that units of local government could include school districts, libraries, in addition to a county government, city government, etc. We have also made it possible for individuals to participate through a local nonprofit, the Internet Equity Initiative, who has published a speed testing tool so folks can take speed tests on their own, and those will be compiled and submitted as challenges where valid for the challenge process. What can be challenged? So any location that you see on the map can be challenged if what you see you believe is not correct. That gets us into all of the challenge types, which we'll go through again today, but looking at availability, speed, latency, technology, a planned project, a previously grant-funded project that's coming. All of those will be the types of challenges that folks can submit. And then when will the challenge process be held? We had been saying as early as January 29th. Again, this is dependent on NTIA approval, so I think it's looking more like early February now, and then we'll have that exact timeline once we have our start date. Refreshing on key terms. So the first term here is a broadband serviceable location. The formal definition is any business or residential location in the US, so in our case in Illinois, where mass market fixed broadband internet service is or can be installed. So you'll hear about sort of what data is informing the map, which is the FCC fabric. The FCC fabric has all of these broadband serviceable locations, or BSLs. So if you hear the term BSL, it essentially means a location on the map. Then we have unserved, underserved, and served. These terms are important because they tell us whether a location is eligible for infrastructure funding or not. So if a location is unserved or underserved, it will be marked as eligible on the map. And what that means is it either has no broadband service or speeds lower than 25 over 3 megabits per second. In that case, it would be unserved. Or it might have those 25 over 3 speeds, but does not have speeds of 100 over 20 megabits per second. So kind of better than that basic level, but doesn't quite achieve that higher level that we're really looking for. That's our second priority, which is called underserved. If a location is marked as served, this means that it has access to broadband with speeds of 100 over 20 or higher. And by access, we mean that the resident of that home or that business can call up their internet service provider and enroll in that service within 10 days. So all of these definitions are kind of set by the federal government, and we need to comply with them in order to implement these funds. Community anchor institution, we will dig into this a little bit more today, but at the highest level, it's a local institution that provides critical services and support to residents, particularly those in underrepresented communities. A multi-dwelling unit is a residential building with at least 2 units, so an apartment building. And then finally, latency is the time it takes for data to go to a server and back to your connection. So what you don't want is high latency, which the NTIA guidelines consider above 100 milliseconds. And with high latency, you may have a kind of choppy internet connection when you are streaming video or doing a video chat like this one, for example. So this is just a reminder about pre-registration. We had an initial deadline for this, but then have adjusted course and are willing to accept pre-registrations up until the start of the challenge process and then on a rolling basis. But the reason to pre-register in advance is so you can get your login credentials as soon as the challenge process opens. So there's not any delay in us getting back to you because things will be quite busy once that window opens. And then finally, a reminder about our landing page, dceo.illinois.gov/BEAD challenge. I know the Illinois Office of Broadband website has a lot going on, so this is the page for any sort of resources related to the BEAD challenge. This is where the link to the map is, our social media graphics, as well as all past webinars, slides, and recordings. All right, so before we get into the BEAD challenge map demo, we're going to just give some framing here on like where does the map fit into the challenge process? How did it come to be? And we've received some questions already, and so trying to get ahead of those in the slides, but of course, we'll spend as much time needed when this call ends to go through some different scenarios, as well as happy to set up time offline with any of you to kind of dig through further. So the 3 main phases of the challenge process is 1, pre-registration, which we talked about, 2, which is the BEAD challenge map, which we'll talk about today, and then 3 is that challenge portal where you can take a location from the map and actually submit it with an uploaded piece of evidence in the portal. So when and how will the BEAD challenge map be useful? The reason why we have the map, I think, is we've got a couple reasons. The first is to submit a challenge, a user needs to have a location's location ID, which comes directly from the FCC Fabric data. Many of folks, I know a lot of ISPs, maybe some local governments have access to the Fabric data already, so you're kind of covered on that front. But many folks who want to participate won't have that information. So a big benefit of this map is you can go in, look for a location, and it'll already have the location ID and all of the other requisite data points associated with that location on the map. So you can submit a challenge directly from the map, or even just write down the location ID and bring it to wherever you need to bring it. So I think a big reason why someone might engage with this map is they don't have access to the Fabric ID and they want to see which locations might be marked as eligible, ineligible, and various other pieces of information associated with each location. So there will be 2 ways to submit challenges. The first is kind of that process I just described. You visit the map, you find a location, you click on one location, or you use the lasso tool to click on several, you click add to challenge, You click Submit Challenge, and then you'll be taken to a separate portal, which is not live yet, where you can upload evidence like communication with an ISP, permits an ISP may have pulled for a future build, etc. Option 2 is for entities who may have access to the FCC Fabric data, which is kind of all the information behind the map. For those who already have this, you may want to go the bulk challenge route, which is what we focused our webinar last week on. We'll have a series of CSV templates per challenge type available for download with clear definitions of what we're looking for each data point, and lots of handy tables for you to pull from directly. So you can use a CSV for kind of a bulk challenge, and then you can forego the map and just submit directly to the portal. Here's a little handy flow chart to help you figure out which option is right for you. So like I mentioned, the big question is, do you have access to the FCC Fabric data? If you've never heard this term, or you tried and were unsuccessful for whatever reason, or you just only might want to submit a couple of challenges, which is perfectly fine, then you would go to the No, and then the arrow points to Use BEAD Challenge Map. So you'll be able to search directly for your address or a certain address, find a location, and submit a challenge through there. And then in the reverse, if you do have access to the Fabric, we encourage you to use the CSVs that will be available for download and submit a bulk challenge directly to the portal. You are also welcome to use the BEAD map. This is a recap of all of the challenge types. So I won't go through all of these in detail just for time's sake, but maybe a couple of flags here. An availability challenge. If your experience in terms of accessing broadband is different than what's reflected on the map, you can challenge the availability of broadband service at your location. Same with speed, same with latency. If you're an ISP and you are planning service within, I think it's by June of 2024, and have documentation of that plan service, you can submit a challenge to update the map. Same thing with existing service. And then the last two, a location is a CAI or is not a CAI. If you believe that there is a school, a library, a certain nonprofit that fits the CAI definition, but is not reflected as such on the map, we'll ask for you to submit that as a challenge with your explanation. So if you've been following along, this should be familiar to you, but I think it's really important to reiterate is, how are we defining community anchor institutions, or CAIs? So we took our baseline CAI definition from NTIA's sort of model challenge process. And then we put this out into the world in the fall, received public comment, and now are working to finalize our definition of CAI and kind of who are the eligible entities and how are we determining that. Again, this is all subject to final NTIA approval, but this is where we're at so far. So a CAI includes a school or institute of higher education, library, government building, a health center, hospital, public safety entity, public housing organization, community support organization, which includes certain nonprofits like employment centers, senior centers, nonprofits that provide direct service related to internet accessibility, and then parks. And one more thing to add here. So CAIs will be marked on the map as either eligible or ineligible for BEAD funding. Illinois is saying that all CAIs should have access to gigabit symmetrical service. And so based on our geographic analysis, if a CAI is determined to not be able to access that gigabit symmetrical service, then it is considered as eligible for BEAD funding, and the reverse is true if it already can access it. All right, two more slides here, and then I think we'll get on to our map demo. So here's some background info. I'll talk through this, and then we'll probably ask Shubhika to weigh in with some additional details, because she is our mapping expert here. So a big question you may be asking is, where did this map come from, and what data is informing the BEAD challenge map? So this map is from the FCC Fabric Data version 3.2. So this is the version that was released in July of 2023. Every location in this fabric has a location ID. The second piece of data that's informing this map are enforceable commitments. So we receive data sources from the federal government as well as through our own state grants to identify areas that are already grant funded and are planning to deploy fiber or technology that can otherwise meet the required speeds, but have not been built yet. But because we have evidence that they are grant funded and these projects are happening, those locations will be listed as served. But please note that if the project is in the build phase, the provider won't be listed yet. So these are kind of projects to come that we have full confidence will be coming because we don't want to double fund them. I highlighted a couple of challenge opportunities here. So if you are an ISP and you're a part of a commitment that you believe fits this criteria and is not reflected on the map, you can submit a challenge that you are part of an enforceable commitment, and the same goes with the reverse. How is it determined what is listed on the map and how? So the data that's a part of the FCC fabric is Internet Service Provider data submitted through the BDC as of June 30th, 2023. So another challenge opportunity, we know that June 30th was, some time ago now. So ISPs that have either planned service or existing service and can demonstrate that with the requisite evidence can submit a challenge to show that much. And then finally, similar questions around community anchor institutions. So like I shared, the state has incorporated public feedback into how we're defining CAIs. We'll be publishing a big CSV list of all of these CAIs. A CAI may not be in the fabric, so we've assigned it its own CAI unique identifier to keep track of all of them. All of those will be available on the BEAD map, and then we'll soon have that CAI CSV available for download. Another challenge opportunity. If you think an organization should be considered a CAI on the map, but it is not reflected as such, there's a challenge type called C, challenge type C, where you can make the case for why a location should be considered a CAI. And same thing in the reverse. A location actually is not a CAI. You can make that argument as well. And just highlighting here, the FCC fabric really focuses on certain locations like households and businesses, certain schools, but it didn't originally incorporate CAIs. It didn't include them. And so that's why we went through this kind of manual exercise of figuring out who's missing from this list. Let's just add them ourselves. And that's why we have a list of CAIs, and appreciate anyone who may have provided that input along the way. And finally, a CAI is considered eligible for BEAD funding based on its proximity to technology that indicates that it can access that gigabit symmetrical service should it want to enroll in that service. This is defined by data such as proximity to fiber, connectivity via E-rate, which is an FCC program for schools and libraries, and then connectivity through the Illinois Century Network, which is the state's fiber network. So I know that was a lot, but I think this will all become a little bit more tangible when we get into the demo. So I will pass it to Shubhika right now to start us off.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Devon. That was super helpful. So I think with this section of the webinar today, really getting into the challenge map, and I know we shared the link in the newsletter, so we've already started to receive some really good questions around what's it really showing and all of that. So I hope this presentation today helped you get a better sense of the data and then how you really work with it. And everybody has now access to the link, so would definitely encourage you taking a look at the map on your end, and if there are any issues or recommendations that this is something that would make it easier for us to use the map, definitely welcome that as well. So we're going to walk through a few scenarios, and as I do that, we'll also walk through the different tabs and features on the map. So we look at locations that are served, we look at a multi-dwelling unit specific example, a CAI example, and then also locations that currently show up as unserved and underserved on the map. So I'm now going to share my screen for the demonstration. And we basically have already identified a few addresses just to like make this easier for the demo purpose in the webinar today. If we have time towards the end, we can also work with an address from somebody in the participants today. So we'll keep that option open if you want to look at a specific location yourself. So starting off, this is the first screen that you're going to see when you access the BEAD challenge map link. So it's a basic introduction of this map contains all the broadband serviceable locations and CAIs that have been identified in Illinois. We have some basic instructions on maintaining a zoom level in order to be able to see these locations. And then there's going to be information on availability, how you can add and remove challenges, select different locations and add them to your challenge, and then how you basically submit these challenges to the portal. There's no minimum or minimum limit to how many challenges you can actually submit through the map. At this point, as Devon mentioned, the challenge portal is not live. So when somebody clicks on it, they are going to get a prompt saying that anticipates opening the challenge process in the coming weeks. So that is when, you'll directly go onto the challenge portal if you want to do so. So the different tabs starting off, these are all the different filters that we have on here, and we'll get into these as we're looking at examples. But this is where you can toggle layers on and off as you are using the map. Then we have the broadband site. So when we actually look up an address, this is where it's going to show all the locations that you are looking for and that are in the map extent that we're looking at. And any locations that we add to the challenge will actually all start accumulating in the challenges tab right here. So let's start with the first example. We're looking at a served location in Grand Tower, Illinois. Let's see what the map has to say about this location. So we type in the address, it takes us to that location on the map. As you might see, there might be instances where the address pin is slightly away from the actual address. In this case, we're looking at 120 Main Street, and it's slightly away from the blue pin where the map took us. In some cases, that might be a little more, far from where the pin takes us. That's just because it's, two different data sets that we're working with. So there might be instances where you might have to drag a little here and there just to like find your actual location on the map. So now looking at this, and I think before we do that, also just sharing a little bit about the colors that we've used on the map. So reds, we have tried to use reds whenever a location would not be eligible for funding based on its availability and enforceable commitments. The same has been used for community anchor institutions. We have yellow and green for all locations that are underserved and unserved respectively, and those would be eligible for funding. So that's like the color scheme that we've used throughout. So it seems like in Grand Tower here in the extent that we're looking at, and let's go to broadband sites. So this is the first address that we looked up. One way is, we can just individually click on these locations and get information about the address, the specific location ID, if there is an enforceable commitment or not, and how is it categorized. So one's the color, but you can also see that it is served in the serviceability column here. And the same level of information is also available in the tab right here. So it depends on whatever works best for you. You can look at the providers who have reported service at this location by clicking on the providers button here. And then similarly, you can do that in the map extent itself, where you click this and it's going to blur the entire screen and you just look at the providers. So two ways of doing it, whatever works best and works with your workflow, you can do that. So at this location, we see two providers. We can also see the technology that they have reported and the speeds, the maximum upload and download speeds reported. So yeah, you can actually start using this just to get a sense of what the map has to say about your location, or if you're a local unit of government or nonprofit or CAI who's like working on preparing for the challenges, that is also when you can like, look at this. And now, for example, you want to challenge Whisper's fixed wireless, and this is just for example. So you can select add challenge right here, and this would now be added to the new challenge. So there's like this challenges, and we have our address listed in the challenges right here. If you want to be submitting multiple locations or actually carrying them to the portal from the map, we can also use the lasso rule here. So for example, we realize that there are a lot of Whisper locations here that might not receive the service that is reported. So we can just click on the lasso tool that activates it and then just draw a polygon or any area on the map, and all of these get selected. We have an option to add these to the challenge. And so now all the selected locations are highlighted in blue, and we can look at them individually right here. So we see, yeah, we want to ensure maybe that all of these are served by Whisper and we're not adding like locations that we don't want to challenge. So we can look up that information here. And just for example, so like with 119 Main Street, when we click on any of these, the broadband serviceable location, it's just going to help highlight that location, making it easier for us to get a sense of which location are we exactly looking at. So that can also be, this is going to be true for any of the locations that we're looking at. So if you want to remove a location at this point, you can certainly do so by clicking on remove challenge, and that just removes that from one of the blue bubbles, which is essentially representing any locations that are in the challenge tab. Another way of doing this is just, clicking on multiple locations as well and adding them to the challenge. So those are certain ways of doing this. So in this example, we basically saw a bunch of served locations that do not have any kind of enforceable commitment. In the next example that we have, we're going to Pearl, Illinois, and looking at a location that has enforceable commitments. So we're going to see what that looks like. So again, the map takes us there. And one other filter that we can probably use if we are only interested in looking at enforceable commitments, in the filters section here, we have a filter for enforceable commitments. When we select this, it's only going to be locations that have some kind of enforceable commitment that are going to be remaining on the map. Any location that does not have an enforceable commitment will disappear when we check the enforceable commitment filter on the map here. So selecting this, we see that yes, there is an enforceable commitment, and for locations that have that, we also have the funding program that is actually that makes this location an enforceable commitment. So this is through an RDOF program, and then we can look that there are no providers listed for this location. So that is very much a possibility because this information is existing service reported by ISPs. So for this particular location, we see that there is no cable, copper or fiber or fixed wireless provider who has reported service, but it's still marked as served because it's going to be, served through the RDOF program at a later point in time. So again, this is marked as ineligible for BEAD funding and hence red in color. So that's one example here. And just zooming out, another note of caution, we've been getting emails that not all locations in a particular area are reflected. What is the basis for the location data? So as we mentioned, it's the Fabric version 3.2. And in certain cases, it does take time for all locations to load on the map. So we would definitely recommend using a good internet connection, because if not, there might be instances where you're missing out on seeing a bunch of locations on the map just because they did not load properly. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll get to them soon. But in the next example here, we're going to be looking at a multi-dwelling unit. So I've identified one in Chicago. I'm going to type in the address here. So we don't see that because we have the enforceable commitment filter on. So I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to turn on the multiple dwelling unit filter. So this is for, some of our nonprofits who are more working with MDUs and they want to focus their efforts on challenges for MDUs. They can certainly use this. And just like the enforceable commitment filter, what happens here is only locations that have 2 or more units will now remain on the map, all others will not show up. So with this example, again, looking at what the map has to say about this particular location, we have the address. It is not covered by any enforceable commitment, but it is served, and it has 28 units as reported in the FCC fabric. And these are the different providers who have reported service. So again, based on the data, you can add this to the challenge, and it'll go on to this and it'll show up towards the end. So that's essentially how any challenge you add that goes to the bottom of the list in the challenges tab. So that's one way of looking at the multiple dwelling units. Now looking at a community anchor institution. So for this one, we can also actually search by a place or a zip code. So I'm going to use the example of a place. Let's look at Decatur, Illinois. And let's go back to our filters. We have our MDU filter on. So we might want to exclude that. When we uncheck that, we see all the other broadband serviceable locations. So again, an example of how that works. And now, because we maybe want to just focus on community anchor institutions, we can turn off the broadband serviceable location filter off. So all of those other locations that are not community anchor institutions or not identified as community anchor institutions yet would then disappear from the map, and we only get to look at the community anchor institutions. So again, a similar kind of information available for them, and let's probably look at it here. So this is essentially information. Oh, that's a broadband serviceable location. So on here, we actually get information for all broadband serviceable locations and community anchor institutions. So you can just click on it and get a sense of what exactly is happening. So maybe to look at this, we don't have provider information for community anchor institutions because they were not part of the fabric, and hence we don't have that individual provider and what did they report for it information. But then we have defined eligibility based on the 3 factors that Devon had earlier mentioned. So if they are close to existing fiber services, if they have service via E-rate or via the middle mile network, the Illinois Century network. So it's going to be categorized that way. Not all of these are going to have information about providers because they did not exist on the fabric. And so we do not have that underlying information for each of the CAIs. But you'll get a sense of how the state has categorized them, eligible or not, using this eligibility information here, or just looking at the color of the CI. And another thing to note here, as Devon mentioned, the broadband serviceable locations have location IDs, but the CAIs have a CAI ID, and that's mentioned here. So this is going to be the one that's going to be carried onto the portal when we actually hit on submit challenges and it's ready. The portal is also live. So that is how that is going to work. I'm just going to, let's go to challenges. Okay, so that was our CAI example. And now moving on to looking at some of the locations are already marked as unserved or served, unserved or underserved. So we have one identified in WhatsApp. So again, let's go back to our filters, make sure we have broadband serviceable locations turned on. And now we see that these are marked green. So they are unserved and eligible based on the existing data. So it's not covered under any enforceable commitment and currently unserved. So let's look at providers. There's no providers listed for this location. So hence it's categorized as unserved and eligible. So this gives us a sense of the map. We have a few members from the CN team as well joining the call, and Devon, I think that's pretty much the demonstration side of things. If you want to add additional features here that I might be missing, just let me know. I think one thing also, yeah, so after you've done all of this analysis, going to the challenges field and selecting submit challenges. So that's going to take you to the portal. At this time, it's not going to work because the portal is not live. So hence this prompt that it's going to start in a few weeks and check back for updates. So if there are organizations who are already working and looking at the map and all of that, they can actually save all of this as a CSV. So you can name it as you like. So this is the first one, and I'm going to save it. And there's this feature called the load challenges from CSV. This is only to load CSVs that might be generated from the BEAD challenge map. So this could be a pretty good use case for people who are working on the map right now, but cannot submit challenges yet. So they can just save that CSV and now load. So I'm going to just select that file. And oh, let me actually, wait, let's do this. So there's this other feature, which is if I were to go onto the map a second time, it actually gives me the option for whether I want to restore the challenges that I had previously included in the map. So I can do that. I can select always restore, or I can select no. So if I select yes for this example, and I go back to challenges, I still have all the locations that I had added to my challenge. But now, if I do the same exercise a second time, and if I select no, so when I go to the challenges, it's all cleared. So if that is something that happens, I still have my CSV saved from last time, so I can just select that and open it. And all of those locations that I had previously added to my challenge will show up here. So that could be one of the features that might be helpful. We have a few more things here. So you can also view all of this challenge information in a table, if that's helpful, as you're looking through all the locations that you have added. So looking at a tabular version might be helpful. And then there's also delete all challenges. So if you're just exploring, don't want to retain any of it and want to start afresh, you can just also delete all of them. It's going to ask you for confirmation, say yes, and all of that goes away. So yeah, now that sums up the demonstration.
Great. Thank you so much, Shubhika. I think for time's sake, let's start going through questions, and then if there are other things that folks want to see, we can kind of go through those in tandem. So had some replies in the chat, but I'll just verbalize to make sure that everyone's getting these. So we have one question that a business fiber provider is shown as providing access to residential BSLs along their fiber route, but that residential service is not available. Is there a way to correct this globally? Or is it necessary to get every misidentified resident to challenge this individually? So what I had shared is this would be a type B challenge type, which is called business service only. And there's a way to submit all of these in bulk. The individuals do not have to do this. It's actually preferred that it is one of the eligible entities who gathers this information. So that could be, David, I'm not sure which organization you're representing, but maybe this is you, either a nonprofit, unit of local government, or internet service provider. What you'll need to do is first gather evidence. So you might just have like one document that can serve as evidence to show that it is only business service for this series of locations. And then all you need is the list of the locations. So you could either go into the BEAD challenge map and do like a lasso, they're right down the street, and then select any other ones that might be included. Or if you have access to the fabric, you can find those location IDs too, put them all in one spreadsheet and submit them. So you don't need anything from the individual residences unless there is information that you need to kind of confirm what service is available.
And I think just to add to that, Devon, I just want to also thank David again for bringing this to our attention. We had also realized this affecting some of the other counties in the state. So we're also going to be carrying out a similar analysis. So feel free to reach out to us. And if we need to like compare notes on locations that might be affected, certainly happy to do that.
We have a question, will the existing challenge type be separate from the plan service type, or will they be submitted on the same template? So this is something that we are trying to figure out what is most intuitive for you all. Where we have landed is that it'll be one challenge type existing in planned service, but with a column to indicate which one you are referring to, existing or planned, and then submitting your evidence as such. We're trying to avoid creating more challenge types because that just adds more CSVs, makes it more confusing for folks. But if that feels, not right, please let us know what your suggestion is, but there will be a way to differentiate. We have several individuals from our company reviewing the challenge map. Will they be able to see each other's challenges? So this is where the pre-registration comes into play. Anyone who pre-registers and then is confirmed and validated will receive their own login credentials. If you want to be collaborating with someone on your team or from your organization, I suggest just using the same login credentials. And then once you're in the challenge portal, you'll be able to see the list of challenges that have been submitted and then track the status. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. You could have like a, company-wide login information, for example.
And I think just to also add to that, we plan on making public all the locations that have been successfully challenged after the challenge phase of the process for sure. We are working on some tools that could be accessible during the challenge phase itself, but not sure of that at this point in time. But after the challenge process, you'll definitely be able to see all the successful challenges received throughout the state.
Yes, we're working on, we want to make it as transparent as possible. So figuring out if that's a public dashboard or something like that, within the time constraints, of course. And then looks like there is a response to that. We can't until we get our credentials. Yeah, so credentials will be generated and shared with you closer to when you can actually log into the challenge portal, which goes back to the green light that we are waiting on from NCIA. And we'll share like the email that it's coming from so you can, mark it whitelisted in your account. Make sure you don't miss that. Okay, got a question about how are conditions like rain, fade, or other interferences with wireless providers handled? Many of the wireless providers listed are using public frequencies and not privately registered signals. So locations covered by licensed fixed wireless and licensed by rule are considered served if they offer 100 over 20 speeds and underserved if they offer up to 25 over 3. If it is a location served only by unlicensed fixed wireless, it is not considered served and thus would be eligible for BEAD funding. So Shubhika, you can check me on that. Does that sound right?
Yeah, no, that's accurate. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that should answer your question. How does this process fit with the speed test challenge process? So the beadchallenge.org tool is something that can be used within 60 days of the challenge window opening by individuals. This is like the kind of key way for individuals to participate should they want to submit a speed test. So anyone who's taken a speed test to date or before Monday, this past Monday, was kind of going off of their own experiences or assumptions about their internet service. What is helpful now that the map is live is that before someone takes a speed test, they can check their location on the map by searching their address, their zip code, their community, and see its eligibility status. If a location is already eligible for BEAD funding, or it, so meaning it is green or yellow, or when you click on the location and you see the providers and the speeds and the technology, someone says, yep, that's what I get, no issues here, then they don't need to take a speed test. They are welcome to, because I think it's always good for folks to, learn about these terms and what to know, what they're getting in terms of speeds, but kind of not worth it for this challenge process specifically. However, if they see something on the map that does not reflect their current experience, they can do a couple of things. One, if they want to challenge the speed, then they can take that 3 speed tests over 3 days. That'll be collected by the nonprofit, the Internet Equity Initiative. who will submit the valid sets of 3 speed tests as a challenge. So anything that has happened before this week and then through the end of the challenge process will be kind of valid challenges after we validate them. If an individual sees an issue with availability, so their home may be marked as served, but in their experience, they cannot actually access that connection or that speed, they will need to work with an eligible entity to submit their challenge. So they might say, local library, I'm not getting the service that I see on the map. Here's proof of a letter denying me service. Can you help me submit this? And, we're happy to support all of you if you do get one of those kind of one-off situations. Will there be only one round of BEAD funding? If so, what happens to all of the and underserved areas after that? So there will be a 1-year process to kind of allocate which broadband provider, which entity is covering each region of the state. But we have to prioritize all unserved and underserved areas in this process. That is kind of like the whole reason behind BEAD. So assuming BEAD is successful, there will be no and underserved areas or households following the implementation, which is that 1-year subgrantee process and then another 4 years of implementation. And then I'll say, so Illinois received $1.04 billion. This was based on the sort of initial FCC maps. As you can see, we are working to get that map even more refined and even more accurate. But that $1.04 billion will only take us to a certain amount. So it needs to take us to connecting all of the unserved and underserved areas. And then, our hope is that we can also be connecting all of the community anchor institutions, for example, that are marked as eligible. So all of that will kind of be a balance of technologies and strategy and whatnot. Okay, I see Tina's question, the individual may not be paying for 100/20 speed. Yeah, so I can talk through a couple of the nuances here. If a household is marked as served and they believe they are not receiving 100/20 speeds, it is best to identify a household who's subscribed to 100/20 speeds or greater to see if kind of what the speed tests show. If someone is subscribed to something lower, they're not going to see 100/20 on their speed test anyway. So it isn't a useful sort of way to gauge the level of broadband service at that household. But as Alexis shared, latency is another factor here. So if someone is subscribed to something lower than 100/20, but they do take a speed test, and in that speed test, it shows latency. If the latency is above 100, then it could qualify as being underserved. So there's a couple different factors to keep in mind in how the federal government and we define quality broadband service. Another threshold here to mention is the challenge can push something from underserved to served. Served to underserved or underserved to unserved. So let's say that a location is considered underserved and it has access to that 25/3. If that household can demonstrate that they are not getting that and they are subscribing to at least 25/3, then they may be able to demonstrate that their service is less than that and thus flipping the location from underserved to unserved. Round 3, assuming you're referring to Connect Illinois, announcements will be made later this month and throughout the spring, mostly on an individual basis, but all decisions will need to be made to be incorporated into the BEAD map. So some of these are already incorporated into the BEAD map, but all will be final before the BEAD subgrantee process launches. So again, we're not duplicate funding locations that are already receiving funding from state and federal grants. Any other questions? We have 3 more minutes. Shubhika, do you want to speak briefly to the difference between BEAD eligibility and Connect Illinois and kind of how the two are interact?
Right, yeah. I think we've been receiving some of those questions as well. So we've always been sharing that, like, use the Illinois broadband map to see if your locations would be eligible for Connect Illinois Round 3, and then using the BEAD challenge map now to just see how BEAD requirements define your location. So the main difference here is the speed thresholds for both are the same. So anything less than 25 by 3 would be unserved, and anything between 25 by 3 and 100 by 20 would be underserved, and over that would be served. So the speed thresholds for both the programs are the same, but then there's a difference in technology that defines eligibility. So with Connect Illinois Round 3, we were only looking at locations that have access to wireline. So if they do not, they would be eligible for Connect Illinois Round 3 funding. But with BEAD, they look at wireline plus licensed fixed wireless and licensed by rule fixed wireless. So that makes a lot more locations categorized as served as part of BEAD. And then the remaining that have maybe only satellite connection or unlicensed fixed wireless providers or no service at all, only those would be eligible for BEAD. So I think the main difference between the two being the technologies that we are considering to define eligibility. So yeah, please look at these differently. And this map is not going to be affecting any of the Connect Illinois decisions, Round 3 decisions. That's actually based on the Illinois broadband map, and most of the applications that we have received meet those requirements and would be eligible for funding if they're selected.
Yeah, so kind of 2 different maps, 2 different criteria. We know it's a little complicated, but it's great that we do have 2 programs that are directly targeting building out this infrastructure. So I think by the time the BEAD process officially starts, we'll have squared away all of those other awards. Those will be in motion, and then we'll be kind of zeroed in on BEAD for the next year. All right, well, we are right at the top of the hour, so you all planned the perfect amount of questions. So next week, again, these are Wednesdays at noon. Please make sure to pre-register, because that's how we kind of get you on our list. You'll get the Zoom information, which I don't think will be changing again. And this is how you'll get all of the follow-ups, and just know if there are any time changes, like if there's a holiday, or we run this through the university, so any university sort of conflict we may need to adjust. But we're hoping that next week we'll actually be able to show you the full challenge process walkthrough. We hope to have the CSVs up soon as well, so you can start documenting that. And again, Shubhika and I are here to answer questions one-on-one, on a phone call, a Zoom, by email. And then once this whole thing starts, we'll have a kind of office hours where you could drop in. So that is what to expect. And with that, I think we can close out. So thank you, Shubhika, and thanks, Nancy, and the whole team, and thanks for coming today.
Thank you so much, Devon. We thank you as well. And thanks everyone for showing up today, and we'll see you next week on February 7th.